Welcome to Why I Quit, a show that covers real people quitting their 9-to-5 jobs in search of something different. Listen to inspiring conversations where we dive deep into the stories of why people quit their jobs, what were the hardest parts, where are they now, and any advice for people following the same path. We are so excited to introduce Elena Agaragimova as this week's guest on Why I Quit. Listen as Elena discusses her journey of quitting her corporate job, starting a business, and then eventually going back into the corporate world. Learn how she developed the self-awareness to understand what type of work she is most interested in and passionate about. Get inspired hearing about how she has continued to build her personal brand through podcasting and freelancing while still working a full-time job. Hey, Elena, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I'm excited to hear about your story and dive into it. Do you mind telling me a little bit about where you're from and your education background?
Sure. So born and raised in Russia, in St. Petersburg, Russia, moved to the US when I was 13, at a very ripe age of 13. I always joke and say like it's like probably the worst time to have to move a child, a teenage girl, to anywhere, let alone a different culture, different language, different everything. So moved to Virginia and pursued all my education here. Did my bachelor's in international studies because I was going to save the world and I was going to work for the UN and all those things. Then tried to find a job, like a real career job, so to say. Couldn't find it, so I ended up doing my master's after that in educational leadership, in fact. And that's kind of where everything else, I guess, takes off.
Perfect. And yeah, tell me a little bit about, that decision in terms of like going for the master's, like at that time, was it just a matter of, looking for the right job, trying to figure out what career path you wanted to go down? Like, where was your head at that time?
Yeah, good question. So I'd love to say that I had this plan and I did master's degree because I felt like it's going to give me something I was looking for. But frankly speaking, I couldn't find like a career that I was excited about. I actually wasn't like, after my bachelor's, which took me 6 years to complete, by the way. I spent like almost 4 years at a community college, changed my major 5 times, finally transferred to a 4-year institution thinking it's going to give me all these things that everybody was promising to us young people at that stage. And so I tried to find like work, but I always find it so ironic because now I do like career consultancy work and strategy. Back then I had no idea what was going on. So like, and it's just, I went through the hard way to create the career that I have today. And so I couldn't really find work. So I was like, I don't want to just keep like, I wanted to continue to educate myself. So I was like, let me just do a master's. A friend of mine was doing a master's in educational leadership. Frankly speaking, I wasn't 100% sure what that was all about, but it had some international exposure and I've always wanted to do international work. And so it had like a study abroad but like certain like opportunities for study abroad. So I was like, this sounds cool and I'm glad I did it. It was really awesome. But that's kind of how I ended up doing it.
Perfect. And tell me a little bit about your transition from your master's into, kind of first job and what that led from there. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so at that time when I joined the 4-year degree, I was part of the Foreigners, which is like an international student group. And so I met a lot of the students from the Middle East, particularly from United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And so a lot of the people that were around me were international students, but particularly there was a lot of Saudis in my school. And so I became really good friends with a lot of those people. And they would always tell me like, hey, like you got to go work at our embassy. Like they would love to have somebody like you, because I was so passionate about like mentoring. And as part of my program that I was doing for my master's, I did a lot of like kind of work on campus. I was doing orientations and mentorships and academic advising and things like that. And they're like, oh, like would love you, because there's a whole wing of Saudi Arabian embassy in DC that focuses on students that are coming to study in the US. And as many people know, Saudi students brought a lot of money to US campuses and just the communities that they lived in. Because they had the scholarship program. So that's kind of how I ended up going to work for the Saudi embassy, their cultural mission, and where I was basically just responsible for getting students here, getting them enrolled in universities, helping them figure out what they want to do, and just kind of, just making sure they had everything they need to be successful in their studies in the States.
Perfect. And at that time, did you think you were going to have like a career in education, international relations, like, did you have any entrepreneurial aspirations? Did you see yourself having a more corporate career, or, what did that look like?
Yeah, I never really saw myself as a corporate person. But I also quickly realized I'm not made for education as well. Like after I worked for the embassy for I think like 2 years, 2.5 years or something like that. Yeah, like 2.5 to 3 years. I worked there, and then I went to a larger university, George Mason University, where I spent a year, and I was like traveling all over. Like that was super fun. Like I did international recruitment, so it kind of gave me that international feel. But ultimately, I like it was a little bit too slow moving in many cases for me, just because that's how higher education is. And what I've seen often is not to each his own, but a lot of people in higher education are there for that stability. They kind of, it's a great job if you want to raise a family, if you want to have, like you get a lot of educational perks and all that. But it wasn't really for me. I never saw myself there long term, but I also never really saw myself in a corporate world, because I felt like that was also so like rigid, and I found myself that I'm not like that. I wasn't yet thinking about entrepreneurship. I knew those two weren't for me. I didn't know what was going to be next for me. But yeah, so that's kind of where I was at that stage of my life. The entrepreneurship really kicked in a little bit later for me.
Yeah, and tell me, was there a specific moment when that kicked in for you? Was it, something in with your current job, or was it something, an idea that sparked, what got you into entrepreneurship?
I don't remember the specific moment. I remember when I made the jump. I mean, I've kind of always knew that there was something more. You have this like weird feeling. You're like, there's got to be more than just this. There's got to be more than just like, you go to your 9 to 5, and then you have your white picket fence, and like, and that's life. Like to me, it was never like that was never a thing in my head. Like, and I remember even when I was at George Mason, I wanted to leave the country, so I was like interviewing in different parts of the world. So I was trying to find a job abroad. Like I definitely wanted to like just take a break from the US and go get international experience. I was like applying for all sorts of different things. So I always had that itch to do something more international. After George Mason, I went to Dubai, and Dubai being a very entrepreneurial kind of fast-paced city in general, I think that was probably the first time when I was like, oh, like this is cool. And I actually, I can actually, I think I might be able to do something here. And so when I moved there, I tried to do like that was kind of the first time that I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can try to do something. Obviously new to the country, didn't know much, not a great idea, but I've tried it like here and there. I remember like I started a blog, and I wanted to like just do stuff. And I think that's when blogging just started coming around. Like it was like 2014. Like now it's everywhere. But if I don't know if you remember, but I think 2014 was still a little bit early for like there were blogs, but not like it is today, right? Like it's a whole thing now. But anyway, so that's kind of what sparked. And what really sparked me is when I actually started working in Dubai and started doing all those different things, I started meeting a lot of people. And because Dubai at that time, especially, and even now, was pushing this like entrepreneurship, all of that. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And I was like, that's kind of what I've always been trying to find something. And I was always good at like building and creating. And so that really kind of started, pushing me towards that thinking, like really start thinking what else I can do. And that's when I started freelancing. And that was the first kind of taste of like, oh, I can actually make money on the side, not doing a 9 to 5, but something else.
Yeah, I love it. And I'd love to dig into that in terms of the freelancing side. I know a lot of people out there who are looking to, you know, find a side hustle or like find a way to get out of their current 9 to 5, are always kind of looking for some of those ways to make money. How did you think about figuring out what you wanted to offer as a freelancer, and how did you even start doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do agree. There's a lot of people like, well, how do I get started? I'll tell you how I got started, and maybe it will work for some, maybe not. But I was very much into networking, so people just kind of knew me, and I would always just talk about. And I was just so naive and kind of genuine, I guess, in a way, of just talking about stuff that I enjoy. And so naturally, people are like, oh, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? So through conversations, and because I was so curious and like excited, and people who knew me, like they knew I wanted to, like I'm a hard worker, and they knew I would always give my time. So it started through just different conversations in the right circles, I guess. I didn't know those were the right circles, but I think because I had such a diversified group of people around me through my work, through an international experience, Dubai is also very much a hub for so many people coming through and being open to share. I see the same thing in the DC area as well. So I think it's just attending networking events. And I know it sounds so like, well, yeah, we know that, but really, like, it's where it's at. Like, it's building those relationships, because you never know when you're going to meet somebody. You might talk to them and like, hey, like, how, like, do you do that? And so what started happening is, because I was so passionate about a couple of topics, particularly around career development, not knowing that I'm going to end up doing it, I was just passionate and curious about those things. And I was really good at like organizing and events and stuff like that. So people would be like, hey, like, have you thought about that? Oh, do you do that on the side? And I'm like, no, it's just like a hobby, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, maybe I should do it. So it's through conversations I've realized that the things I'm talking about are not always common sense, and not everybody loves this. And that you can actually potentially get paid for career development, for creating programs like mentorship programs, trainings and things like that. So it's kind of what started like dipping my toes into that. So yeah, so that's kind of, I started off, I would say that's probably where it's at, is just sharing what you enjoy doing and having conversations with people. Oh, an important part I would want to add too is that it's not 100% of what I've done on the side was paid. I did make some money on the side in the beginning, but it wasn't always paid. And sometimes it was me volunteering or saying like, hey, do you want help with that? And just because I was curious about that thing that they were working on, and I would just volunteer and give my time. And from there, I was like, oh, like, I actually did a good job. And it gave me a little bit more confidence and a little bit more credibility. And then I was like, oh, like, I can actually might be able to monetize on it. So it started with just really experimentations and having a lot of conversations.
No, I love it. And yeah, I think a lot of times people are so focused on the revenue side. And sometimes when you focus on like, how can I help this other person? It's amazing, like the different avenues that leads down. And, I'd love to kind of know about, kind of some of the successes and failures of those like early days of freelancing. Because I think, a lot of times people start out with an assumption or an idea of like how they're going to make money. And a lot of times once they start actually talking to people and charging, the type of services they're going to offer changes, or, what they end up doing changes, or sometimes they fail in one way or go into another. Tell me a little bit about, what went well that, those early freelancing days, and what didn't go well, and, how did that adjust kind of like as you, continue to grow and scale moving forward?
Yeah, so before I actually jumped ship in about September 2019, I kind of jumped ship from my full-time job at that time. I was always doing things for at least a couple of years on the side. And there came a point where I was generating like a significant amount of money to where it's like, okay, I think I can afford to take care of my bills at least, so that I can spend, really quit my job and kind of do this. So it got to a point where I was like, I might need to take some time off to service these clients, to do these trainings, to do X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of what encouraged me to actually, have the courage to jump ship. And I remember I was on vacation, and I woke up on like the third day, and I was like, I think I'm going to quit my job. Like, it was just as silly as it sounds. It was just that simple. I've been trying to do something on my own, and trying to find that courage and when is the right time for those 2 years that I was always freelancing. And then one time I was like, okay, I think I'm just going to quit my job. So I came back, told my boss at the time, who was also my mentor. And she was like, okay. She's like, well, we like, can you do this at the end of September? And I was like, okay, cool. Cause we had a big event and everything. And I kind of appreciate it, because I needed that few months to really kind of prepare myself now that I'm actually jumping ship. So I remember when I landed from my vacation and I got back to Dubai, and I couldn't wait to tell her. I was like, I think I emailed her like from the airport, like, can we set a meeting like ASAP? Like, I had to tell her that I'm quitting. Like, I was that sure. Like, I was like, I'm done. This is it. And at that time, I also, during that summer, I hired a business coach to help me. I said, while I'm still having a salary, let me hire a business coach, make sure I'm not crazy for doing this. But to go back to your question about like freelancing. So I started off doing a lot of things pro bono and all of that. Even when I went off full time amount, there's a couple of times that I've done that. And I think, to your point, people focus so much on making money, and you hear a lot of different things. My personal experience and opinion, maybe it was my story, but if you're starting off, you really have to prove yourself. And yes, it's up to you how much you want to charge, but I see a lot of people coming out of the door and asking for a ridiculous amount of money, or like they're like, they're listening to those, like you have to charge and you're worth. Yes, you're worth, and you have to make money, and you are worthy and all that, but you also got to be a little bit realistic and think long term, not short term. Like, and I've seen a lot of people just charging ridiculous amount of money for consultancy service, for coaching services. and not really having anything solid. And if anything, in any business, what always sells is relationships and reputation. Today, I don't promote myself. I create content, I create different things, but you'll never see me selling myself hard out there, because everything I do is through reputation and relationship building and word of mouth, because that's what I believe in. That's what's sustainable. When you're seen as like that money hungry, it's fine to be that, but know when it's time for that, and know when it's time to humble yourself down and like do things also to build that credibility, to, you know what I'm saying? So I think there is that important component, because you see a lot of people out there like, you know, believe in yourself and all this, like, you know, like all these like really kind of motivational things, and usually coming from people who never really build a business, or you know what I'm saying? So I'd just be wary of that if I was somebody starting off. And there's nothing wrong with doing something pro bono in a way that makes sense, obviously. So and I think that's another thing people don't realize when they're starting off is, and that's something I don't know how, but I've always realized that if I do this, it might lead to something bigger. And being able to distinguish between where do I give my time pro bono because it's actually working towards something larger, and where is it not worth my time, for example. Right. And having that mindset, that little business acumen to understand when is it worth it and when is it not, I think that just comes with experience.
That funnels perfectly into a question I talk to every guest about, is expectation versus reality of that first year, especially when jumping ship. I think a lot of times, especially people with a side hustle, are like, okay, if I was doing this for 20 hours on the side, now I have full time, I can double my revenue like overnight. But I think a lot of times what people run into is that you spend, especially as a solo entrepreneur, so much time in terms of the admin, the accounting, the legal. And sometimes I think people don't realize how much gets wrapped up into everything they have to do. And so I'd be curious in terms of like, what was your expectation of like what you thought your first year was going to be like, and what was the reality of it?
Yeah. So one of the biggest lessons I've learned is, and that was a tough one to learn. So I used to be known as like the networker. So I had really great relationships, or I thought I did. Let me put it that way. So what I've learned, there's different types of relationships that you're going to have as an entrepreneur. I remember when I was working full time and doing things on the side and having those relationships, I was like, well, I have such a good network, which I did to an extent. But I've realized that there's a difference between networks. So I had a network of people who were happy to associate with me because I was associating with a larger brand of where I was working. When you become your own person, what happens is it's a couple of different things. Some of the networks will stay, right? If you're relevant to their business, if you can truly add value, right? But even those that would promise you the stars in the sky will very quickly fall away, because business is business. And I think that was the toughest lesson for me, is like, at the end of the day, business is business. And what was interesting is that the networking piece was good when I was doing freelance stuff, because it gave me those opportunities to do these small projects right here and there. But I also wasn't relying on those to pay my bills. So that was more accessible. When you go your own way, 85% of your network, in my experience, disappeared. So 85%, and not because people are bad or whatever it may be, but simply because your personal brand is not as strong as a particular brand they wanted you to associate with. So they were associating with you because of that brand. So building your personal brand alongside whatever you're trying to do is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned. And luckily I was already doing that. And that's that 15% of my network that did give me those opportunities is what propelled me to eventually be able to do this for 3.5 years. So network is important, but I think what I realize is that there's different types of networks. You need to be mindful. If people are associating with you based on their current roles and based on your current role, or if they're associating you based on you as an entrepreneur. And I think I didn't distinguish those two. So I wish I would have spent more time with people that would be more relevant to my entrepreneurship journey versus me working full-time at a company. So that was a big lesson. And so that was part of it. And what's interesting is that in my head, I had a plan to quit my job end of 2019. And so, but then June happened. I went on that vacation. I was like, I can't wait till end of the year. So I ended up quitting September 2019. And then, of course, as you know, COVID happened, March or so 2020. Luckily, because I started in September, what happened was it gave me at least about 6 months of runway to see if I was made for it. Meaning that I proved to myself that I can make money, and I did make money from the different, those, small networks that I had remaining that wanted to kind of do business with me under the umbrella of Elena and not a big brand. And of course, then I, build other networks and so on. But that showed me that I can make money, and I did, and I had a good start for those 6 months and even onwards. But if that would have happened, if I would have quit in December and started at like January, because nothing happens in end of December or even half of January, I would have never known that I could sustain myself, probably, right? Because February, especially, like, usually is pretty slow. January, February is pretty slow. So I would have been crushed because the pandemic would have happened, and I probably would have never had those opportunities that I had in between September 2019 and March 2020. Luckily, at that time, also, we got funding for our startup and et cetera. So it really kind of helped us propel through the pandemic and onwards. So I really think timing was a key there. I can't tell you what it was in June. I just woke up and I was like, I think I need to quit my job. Like, I was like, I'm quitting my job, but I think timing for me was essential. And I always look back at it because I might not have had the courage. Like, I might have just, I don't know what I would have done, honestly, but I mean, we can go and explore those scenarios. But yeah, so that was pretty interesting for me.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, over, I think you had a 3.5 year time period where you ran that business. What were some of your biggest like learning lessons that you took away from that, you could pass on to someone looking to start their own business, or if you were to start another one down the road, that like things that you would, kind of like wish you knew back when you started it?
Yeah. So I think I'll tell you, like, on a kind of the business side and on a personal side, what I've realized is that for me personally, I've always been an entrepreneur. I knew I always wanted to do something on my own. But what I realized is I don't need to do it with a business partner or an investor or have this huge team. And it's funny because every time I would look, when I was kind of exiting the business and earlier this year or last year, end of 22, early 23, what I realized is, like, I started to reset. I said, okay, what am I learning from this? And what I've learned is that I never really wanted to have like a team of 11 people that we had. Like, I never wanted to have this huge company or manage other people's wellness and financial well-being because they rely on the money that we make and all that. Like, that's stressful. Like, all I want to do is continue to create and build and to generate revenue to live a life and just do it when I want it, how I want it, with who I want, and so on. And so everybody that I look up to in this world in terms of kind of independent creators don't have that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why did I even go that route? I'm glad I did. It really gave me solid self-awareness of what I can and cannot do, what skills I have and do not have. That business in particular, I would not have been able to do without my business partner, Yvonne, who was kind of the more technology person. He was kind of the engineer behind a lot of the things, right? Like, I'm the creative, I'm the face of the company, I'm the speaker, and so on. I'm not those, like, it's hard for me to pay attention to details. So self-awareness was a huge takeaway. From a business side, what I've learned is that it's very hard to build a business. It is so hard. I would do it all over again for sure. I'd probably just build my own, which is what I'm doing now, is to build on my own and then maybe work with collaborators, hire freelancers, and have people work with me, but not having that business relationship and have this huge team of people solely relying on that job, for example. So, and what was interesting is that as we were building it and we were pitching to investors, we pitched to like 50 plus investors, for all of them just to tell us that we either didn't have enough revenue generating each year, or we didn't have enough subscribers for the app, the MVP that we built. And I'm like, well, like, yeah, like, that's why I'm here, so we can like take this further together. And they were like, well, you need X, Y, and Z. Well, if I have X, Y, Z, I don't need you, frankly speaking. I don't need an investor, because investors are draining. Yes, they give you maybe the things that you want, but it's very draining and it's very hard. It's a whole other relationship to manage when I was already managing personal relationships and a business relationship. So I've realized, like, that was a lesson for me. I'm like, I'm good. I do not need to be a unicorn startup. It's just not where I want to spend my energy. And so that was really interesting. One thing I wish I would have known is to have, I think what we could have had as a business is to have somebody who could do the selling on top of what two of us were doing, because we were like the face of the company, doing the marketing, doing the selling. And as you know, it's like you do everything yourself. And at one point, I think we just didn't know how else to prioritize. Like everything felt like a priority. Everything felt like a priority. We were delivering. And part of it was because whatever revenue we were generating every month, we were doing it ourselves, like everything. So we didn't even have that space. We didn't successfully make that space to be like, okay, we need to actually go and continue to bring on that new business, right? So I think one of the biggest lessons is definitely having a person who loves sales. I'm good at sales. I don't love sales. My business partner is not. He's like the back end kind of person. So that was kind of a good realization. The team is important. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. The team is important.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, as you were going through a period of like self-awareness of figuring out what type of business you'd want to run. Talk to me a little bit about how you exited the business and then thought about kind of another business that you'd want to run. And was that hard for you because you had like built that from the ground up, and then kind of like moving in, I'm sure there's like a lot of like emotions and things tied up in that. Talk to me a little bit about what that was like for you, because I think there's a lot of people out there that sometimes their idea is either like not working or not the right fit, but it's like really hard to like give that up. So talk to me about that process and how you went through that.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, it's like your baby, you know what I mean? And then you're just trying to like, you're trying to, build this, like kind of raise this baby. And at the same time, you're trying to maintain a relationship with your business partner. And it was hard for both of us. But ultimately I ended up in the States. He's now in Switzerland. And we knew it was time. We knew it wasn't growing in the way we were just operating as a small business. And it didn't make sense to do it in two different continents. So it was hard. I mean, for months, it took me a long time to be okay with the fact that, okay, this didn't work out. And like, I would, deep down, I knew it was the right time, but it took me a while to actually be okay with it and talk about it. I didn't really make it public, etc. We got together, and the book that you see behind me, the Rough Guide to Awesome Leadership, was like the last thing that we did, and that launched like December 22, and that's when we're already like spending like the last couple of months as we're finalizing the book to kind of start looking at, okay, what are we doing? And we started kind of trying to sell the business off to different partners that we've had, etc. And so ultimately we had a conversation with one of our early investors and talking about how we can at least kind of give off some of our content that we've created. So we had a lot of programs, a lot of really great kind of intellectual property that we had. So we ultimately just kind of parted ways with that. But it was hard. It was hard. And even like, trying to, when we were talking about like selling the actual brand, not the content piece, not the programs, but the actual brand, we realized that maybe that's another lesson learned, is that the brand was us. The brand was Elena and Ivan. And so, and again, I think that's true for most entrepreneurs when they're starting off. I don't think we were there to a point where we could, make it not about us, but, it was us. And that's what we realized. And even some of the people we talked to, they're like, well, the brand is Elena and Ivan, like Besern is Elena and Ivan, you know what I mean? And so it was really hard to package it in a way that sold to an external kind of person, because everybody knew it, like we are the brand. And so maybe that's a lesson learned as well. But yeah, so it's hard, but ultimately, like now looking back at it, I can tell you like it was the right decision for sure. Ultimately, what I'm still doing today is I'm creating and I'm building, except I'm just doing it aside my full-time job that I have. I also do it on the side. So I do my consultancy work, I do my programs, I create my content, and I love it. I'm very happy doing it. Ultimately, I'd like to go again back to full-time on my own independent consultancies, kind of building things for small companies, like talent development structures, strategies, coaching, internal coaching, and these sort of things for companies. That's where I find a lot of my energy, I get a lot of my energy from. So it's something I can see myself doing over and over again. And I think that's a good indicator of like, is something speaking to you? Is like, do you get energy from these things, or is it draining you? right? And I would say like at 85%, you don't have to be 100% of the time, loving everything that you do every day. But as long as you're like at that 85%, I think it's a nice place. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm probably closer to 90, but I'm like at that 90% where I love what I do, whether it's my full-time role, whether it's the consultancy work that I do. I love it. I love it. And I think I found kind of that nice space for now. It might change in the future, but for now, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love how you were able to, kind of leave your initial corporate job, start your own business, eventually go back to corporate, but still go back to freelancing and finding your different things on the side. And you've started a podcast as well. And I think that's a good takeaway for people out there is that like, I think so many times people are looking for, the final answer and the final solution of like, hey, I'm going to do this long term. But like, I think there's so many things that you can, kind of do in between and kind of go along the path to figure out what that is. And so, I'd love to hear about, how do you balance the priorities of, full-time job, freelancing, podcast, personal life? Like how are you able to balance all of those things? And, how do you, kind of figure out like what's most important and kind of set priorities in your like life and work and personal in general?
Yeah, and before I answer that, to your point as well, like I think there's nothing wrong, and it took me a while as well. I'm like, oh, like did I fail? Like did I fail? I'm going back to corporate, but actually, like I really love what I do, and I have that flexibility to be able to do both. There's no conflict of interest in any particular way, and so that kind of works for me. And there's nothing wrong with that because it actually allows you a minute. And I remember like once I was talking to a friend like in early Jan and like, what are you going to do? I was like, I don't know. I was like, I just need a minute. I've been running for 3.5 years. I just need a minute to breathe. And if that means I'm just going to be comfortable in a corporate job, okay. Like that's okay. But I also know myself and it's not my style and I'm always like on it. So, I didn't stay there for too long. I think I took like a week off my freelancing or something like that. And then I was like right back on it. But that's just my nature. That's who I am as a person. And so to answer your question, part is just who I am as a person. So I think my stamina has developed over years that because I've been doing this for so long, even when I had a full-time job, I was always like, whether it's volunteering, whether it's having 3 jobs in college and doing my master's, like 3 side little jobs that I had, right? So I was always doing something. I've been like this. So I think my stamina is built for that in general. So I think that resilience has always been in me for a long time, so I can just produce a lot of things. And I'm like, I know how to, I don't know, I think it's just experience, part of it, right? I think you just adjust. But a part of it also is everything that I do is under the umbrella of Elena brand. And that's something that I keep learning that is so, so important to never let go of your personal brand, especially in the world where companies can cut you at any moment. I think it's so important to not be attached to a company, but remember that you're not just an employee at company A, you are a professional in industry A, and you are a person and you have a name. And I think that's the most important thing because that will take you to that next job, to that next opportunity, to that business. And personal brand really, really does sell, right? So maintaining that is so important. And that's why I've never let go of my freelancing. And I make it very clear with every employer, this is important to me. I've spent years building this and I'm not about to let it go because X, Y, and Z communication policy tells me I can't do B and C. So, and maybe that's not the company for me, like realistically. So, because I always say to my employers, it makes me better at my job. It makes me better because it's under the umbrella of Elena, but it's also under the umbrella of talent development. My podcast, I talk to talent development folks. It's like my own professional development hack. Like it's like a life hack, right? That's like I'm not only creating content, I'm learning and I'm professionally developing in an area and talking to brilliant people. So everything that I do is ultimately making me better as a person and professional. And if somebody doesn't see that, that's not the right place for me, frankly speaking. And so the way I balance it is I'm just super structured. I take care of my well-being. I'm super into fitness. I'm that person, like I do something fitness-wise 7 days a week. I think it's great for you, even if it's 30 minutes a day. And I'm super just organized in the way I do things. I have specific time slots for things. Weekends are a little bit more laid back. And I use a lot of automation tools, a lot of AI to help me make my life easier.
Obviously you're doing the freelancing before you started a business and then you got into the podcast. I think, I'd love to know what made you want to start a podcast? And like, did you have any experience with it? And, I know a lot of people out there like talk about potentially starting a podcast, and, do you have any piece of advice for people out there who are interested in it?
Yeah, I started my podcast 3 years ago. If anybody wants to go look at my first episode, it was with Mac Moore, who was a friend of mine, who thank you so much for even coming on, because I was such a mess. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. So the reason I'm telling you, go back to episode 1, because you can see a clear evolution of who I am as an interviewer, as a podcaster, as a professional, etc. I mean, oh my goodness. So 3 years ago, started it, hot mess, didn't know what I was doing, but I'm the kind of person, I do it. I don't really care. Like, I don't care how it's going to look like. I don't care what people think. I care about what people think, but I don't care if if I'm judged for trying something type thing, so of course everybody cares. Like, I do care to an extent, but I also know that I'm never going to get better without putting myself out there. So I do get scared to do things and like put myself out there, but I do it anyway, because that's how I've always done things and it always worked out. So I started it because I wanted to just create content. And so, but then it evolved into something I would have never expected, which is like, I always say, like, how often can you just message somebody, a stranger on LinkedIn, and they're like, hey, like, do you want to talk? You know what I mean? Like, no, never. You know what I'm saying? So it's somehow created this platform for me where I get to connect with such amazing individuals like yourself, like you were on my podcast recently. I get to connect with people that I would have never connected with before. And it made me better at a thinker. It made me better learning how to ask better questions, which is, I think, is like ultimately so good in everything that I do, even in the business side. It made me more empathetic. It just really, I mean, I just love it. I mean, I can't even tell you, it's such a great personal and professional development tool. Like, yes, it's there for the audience, but I'm just telling you, like, as a podcaster, it has transformed the way I think, the way I talk to people, the way I listen. It made me a better listener, better public speaker. I mean, you name it. And I get to meet amazing people and create, hopefully, content that people like, and I do have my set of viewers and so on. And if it makes a difference just in one person's life, I'm happy. Like, I'm not doing it for some big fame or money. It's just, I love it.
Amazing. Yeah. And, a question we ask every guest before leaving is really, what are you most excited about over the next 3 to 5 years? And it can be personal, it could be business, it could be both. We try to think about not too short term, but not too long term either. But, what gets you most excited moving forward?
Yeah, I'm right now, I don't know, 5 years from now, I'm not sure, I'm not there yet. I know what I want to continue what I'm doing. So I do want to continue to kind of create a positive impact on people's lives through building and creating the things and programs and podcasting and content that I put out there, and just the work that I do with companies. But also, I'm working to elevate my personal brand and who Elena Agara is to the next level. I'm working right now with a PR coach, with a personal branding / kind of stage presence coach. So I am working with them to kind of say, okay, what's next? Like, I've done a lot of really cool things on my own, but like, I really need help to take it to the next level. So I really just kind of want to expand my network, expand my audience, kind of deliver value to a larger audience, and see, and just continue to become this person that I aspire to be, which, just continuing to do what I want, where I want, with who I want, how I want, while hopefully adding value to the world.
Love it. That's a perfect way to end it. And I'm going to include all the links and descriptions in the show notes. But do you mind giving everyone an elevator pitch of where to find you? Tell a little bit about your consulting services, your podcast, and anything else you want to shout out.
Sure. So 3 things I'm super passionate about is leadership development for mid-level managers in particular, or managers to be. The other one is young talent pipeline programs. So how do we actually make sure we have talent that's going to drive our business forward? And the last one is career coaching for individuals. But I spend a lot of time in just like, how can you own your career and build your career to what you want it to be, versus just kind of like job search and stuff like that, which I do, but it's not what really drives me necessarily. So I love that. Something I said the other day on a podcast, and I told my boyfriend, because he's the one who told me about it, is like, where do people find you? And so there's a song by Tiana Taylor, I think, that was written like 10 years ago, and it says, just Google me, baby. And so I just say just Google me. We just like, he was like, you got to say it. And I was like, I think I'm going to say it again today. So like, just Google me, baby, So like, I'm the only Elena Agaragimova on Google, I think, as far as I know. And if you want to find me, you'll find me, so.
No, perfect. That's great. Well, congrats on everything that you've done so far. I'm excited to follow along with your journey and really appreciate your time coming on the show.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We want to hear from you as we keep growing. Please reach out on whyquit.co if you have any feedback or potential guests. A special thanks to Chris Dole for the music. Please check out his newest album, Here's to You, on Spotify. Thank you, and we will be back next week with another episode.